Great, thank you. Good
Chair.
evening, everybody. Yes, I've seen your hand, Councillor Ingle. You want to you've got a comment before we begin, I think.
Yes, please, Chair. I think everybody present in the room is aware of the sad passing of Sir Tom Moore tonight, and I think it's only appropriate that we acknowledge the contribution he's made to this country and the way he touched everybody's hearts. And I know that the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Johnson, has already spoken to the Chief Executive, Brian, and I've spoken with Brian also about whether or not the flags could be lowered outside the Civic Centre to mark his passing. And Brian, can you give us an update on that, please?
Thank you, Bart. Yes, I've done a bit phoning around, and there should be somebody on site at the moment lowering the flags to half-mast. So that will be done this evening. Okay, well, I think that's an entirely appropriate tribute to Tom, and also to all the other 100,000 who have lost their life up to this point. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson. Oh, good evening, Councillor Charles. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Leader of the Council and indeed the Chief Executive for facilitating that. I think it's no better place than a cross-party working group on COVID recovery that we should all express our deepest sympathies to Captain Sir Tom's family and recognise that he was a real light in some very dark times for a lot of people around the country, and I think it's an entirely appropriate response to lower the flag on behalf of the town to show our respects to him and his family. So may he rest in peace.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I share those sentiments absolutely. I feel obviously sad at his passing, but kind of joyful about our response, because I think it's fitting and it sends a signal that he was a wonderful human being in a very dark time in our history, and I just feel proud that we are recognising his passing. Yep. So good evening and thank you, everybody. Oh, Councillor Holcoop, I didn't see you.
Just to, as we've got both Chief Exec and leaders, would it be appropriate, because we haven't got full council to the end of Feb, for us to send a card of condolence to the family on behalf of Harlow Council?
More than happy to do that, Maggie.
I'd fully support that.
Okay.
Yes, and I'd support that as well. Thank you, Maggie.
Okay.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Maggie. Lovely. Councillor Holcoop. Well, excuse me. Good evening, everybody, and it's great to see everybody. I'm glad we're all remaining in good health, all those who are here. I think we do have some apologies. Can I have apologies before we go any further? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Russell Perrin and Simon Carter.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, this is the second meeting of the year of the COVID Recovery, Response and Recovery Working Group. And turning to the agenda, we will now go to declarations of interest. Are there any? There are none. Thank you very much. We will now turn to the minutes of the last meeting, which are page 2 to 4 in your pack. Are we happy to agree those, or are there any comments that people would like to make to the minutes?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Ingle. Anything else?
You're picking up on matters arising.
Okay, fine. Moving on, are there any matters arising from the minutes?
Yeah. On point 63.
Councillor Edwards, yep. Sorry, come to you.
Yeah, point 63. We talked about the free school meals commencing during the February half term. I just wondered whether or not the Chief Executive could give us an update on where things, where things are at.
Certainly. My understanding is that is covered for this February half term, but I'm keeping a close watch on the situation. My understanding is that it is covered.
Right. Thank you.
Anything else under matters arising from the minutes that people would like to raise? No?
Excuse me, Chair. Yes. I think when we had a chat yesterday, when we had a chat yesterday, I think you were going to raise the question of the playgrounds.
Oh, I was sorry. I thought that Councillor Johnson was going to raise it. Sorry, I forgot how we choreographed that. But yes, I was waiting for myself to come in and say I wanted to raise the question of the playgrounds, which in the last meeting we took the cross-party decision to close them, which was a difficult decision, but given the state of the level of infections in our town at that time, we felt that we had to send a signal to the public that it is very far from business as usual, and I think it was the absolute right thing to do. That said, it is within our discretion. We took that decision when the prevailing guidance from government was that that wasn't something that needed to be done, and we took that as a discretionary decision, which means that we still could reopen them. The guidance from the government has not changed, and we could open them. And I wanted to open for discussion with colleagues whether and when we should look to reopen them, mindful of the fact that infection rates are coming down. So, and I think I can, Councillor Ingle, I'll come to you in 1 minute. I know that I wrote to Andrew Bramage today and asked him to be prepared to, in his presentation, share the trajectory of infections over a period of time, because I'm sure we agree that we would need to see a sustained downward trend before we felt that it was right to take a decision about the playground. So that's the other reason I'm sorry I didn't come to it. I slightly didn't want to preempt Andrew's comments, but that's really, I don't have an answer. I'm putting it out there as something I think that there's a lot of parents, I know as a mother of a young child, there's a lot of parents climbing up the walls at the moment, and I don't want them to do that, any longer than they have to. Equally, I want people to be safe. So that's just by way of an introduction to taking views from colleagues on this issue. Councillor Ingle.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I could make a proposal. The government have clearly seen or accepted that schools can be and children can be a vector for transmission whilst the levels of virus is high. And that's why both secondary schools and primary schools are closed. My suggestion would be, and it is just a suggestion, and I'm open to listening to other people's views. My suggestion would be that we should be guided by the government asking primary school pupils to go back to schools. If they view that it's okay for children to learn together and play together in schools, that's the point at which I feel we could take a similar view and say it's okay for children of different families to be together and play together in council playgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ingle. Brian, do you want to come in next, and then Councillor Durkin?
Yes, I just want to set the scene, really. I mean, what we decided last time, and what I then subsequently made the decision of doing, is closing the playgrounds with a view to reviewing that and other service decisions on, I believe it was the 18th of February. I personally think that was the right decision, otherwise I wouldn't have made it. And I actually think that is still the right decision today. The figures, Andrew Bramage will tell you later about the figures going down, but you all have read about the South African variant, which particularly in Broxbourne, next door to us. So the decision previously was we'll review it in mid-Feb, and maybe that is still the right thing to do. But I'll listen to the views of members, of course.
What was the mid-Feb date for, Brian? Just remind me. Was that an arbitrary date or?
No, that was the date when at the time the government were also going to review.
The restrictions are being reviewed. That's right. Thank you.
The reason was it still seems the appropriate time. Obviously, we keep all these things under review. As you know, we have regular meetings of the management board where we regularly review them, but a formal review, we said we do mid-Feb.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Councillor Holcoop and then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that with Brian that we review it in mid-Feb, but the schools potentially aren't going back, are they, till March? and we now do have this South African situation in Broxbourne, which is very close to where we are. So I think until we get a better outlook on that angle, we don't want that coming into Harlow. We are doing quite well now, aren't we? We have a slight up and down in the your Harlow graphs, but we're holding our own. But I think at the moment we've got to be very careful. We know that parents and the children both want to come back into some sort of normality, but I think we've got to be cautious and wait until we are happy as a town that it's safe for our children to go back into the playground. And I think the schools are going to involve that decision making and the government in mid-February, because by then we'll know something more about the South African threat, and the government will have more of a steer on the schools reopening potentially in March. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holcoop, and I should have welcomed you to your first meeting at the start of the meeting, so thank you, you're very welcome. It's lovely to have you here. I think Councillor Edwards and then Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that why don't we have the presentation from Andrew Bramage and listen to and get the latest update and what have you, and then revisit this matter a little bit later on in the meeting when we're fully informed of what the current situation is, and then we can make a, in quotes, an informed decision. I am concerned that Harlow is still, if I remember rightly from tonight, it's around about 38th out of the country in terms of rate and what.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that when we discussed this last meeting and I pushed for these playgrounds to be closed, and we took the cross-party view to advise you that that's what we should do as portfolio holder, we were talking about being the third highest rate in the country, and we had over 1,300 infections in the town. We're now much lower. We're not as low as I would like, and we're now down to a much lower, I think, a quarter of that infection rate. So I think it's getting near the time where we should be looking at this appropriately to, you know, to actually get them open again. I'm happy with whatever date over the next 2 weeks, if it's February the 12th that we review it in line with government guidance, or 15th or whatever. But I think, as we discussed yesterday, Chair, with regard to a lot of these things, I'd like to see that route map to how we open it up, not necessarily specific dates, but what needs to happen. Does X and Y need to happen beforehand? Because I'm sure, for example, we may need to send cleaning teams into the playgrounds before they're opened, and that might have a 2 or 3 day lead time. So we need to be structuring our decision making strategically in a way that works for our officers, but also delivers what we want it to deliver, such as the opening of the playgrounds. So I'm happy to go with the rest of the crowd here. It doesn't quite feel yet the time to reopen, but it's getting close as Harlow drops down and hopefully continues to drop down the league tables.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Well, if everyone's agreeable, I think perhaps we will, Brian, I hope it's okay, take Councillor Edwards' suggestion and park this for the moment and take the decision towards the end of the meeting, having taken into account what the information we're going to have. Councillor Edwards, did you want to come in again on that point?
Yeah, very briefly. I agree with Andrew Johnson that we should be reviewing this in a week or two, but we must remember that the government guidelines at the moment are stay at home if at all possible. And, you know, that's an unequivocal and clear message.
Yeah.
And that needs to inform our decision making. Thank you.
Yeah, no, completely. We need to be consistent and aligned with that message. And I think that was really one of the reasons we took the decision at the last meeting, was we felt that there was an inconsistency there, which we couldn't afford at a time of such seriousness in our town. So I hear you. Okay, are there any other matters arising from the minutes that people would like to raise? No? Okay, terrific. In that case, the minutes agreed as they are. I don't think there are any changes or corrections. Terrific, thank you. Sorry, just my pad playing up. I think we come to the two substantial items on the agenda. Sorry, it just crashed. They being, first of all, Andrew Bramage's presentation to us about the state of the lay of, oh God, I've done it again. So I keep bringing up last week's agenda, but I'm sure it's you, Andrew, and I'm sure it's probably item 4, is it? Can someone correct me if I'm wrong?
5.
5, thank you. Can we move to item 5, which is update on COVID-19 position, please. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Well, we sent around earlier today, a bit earlier than we normally do in view of the meeting this evening, the weekly report. So that's given you some figures, and I appreciate not all members may have had the chance to look through that yet. So I'll do a brief summary, and I've also actually got some updated figures that were published a couple of hours ago by the government that provide the latest position. But just so to give the playground conversation some context, as Councillor Johnson has said, at that point, when that decision was taken at the last meeting, 14th of January, the rate in Harlow was at 1,321. It was the highest in Essex by some way. It was 77% above the East of England average and third highest in the country. So it was a pretty extreme position that we're in that led to that decision. So although government guidance at the time was and still is that playgrounds can be open, the position that Harlow was in was substantially different from the rest of the country. Since then, in the 3 weeks that have followed that meeting, we've seen the rate fall by 31% the first week, another 31% the second week, and then the last week a further 35%. So some significant reductions over that 3 weeks, which pretty much mirrors the position across the country, actually. And in the report that we sent around earlier today, that identified the latest figure for Harlow at 405. But that is actually in the figures that were published a couple of hours ago, that is now down at 371. The national average is 282. So the gap actually between Harlow and the average across the country has narrowed significantly. Only 2 weeks ago, we were putting up messages on the electronic signs across the town saying that Harlow's rate was 70% higher than the English average, and that's now down to about 30% higher. So although the rates have been coming down everywhere, fortunately we've seen the Harlow rate come down significantly. But 371 is still high, and it's about the position we were in the middle of December when the rate started to rise significantly. And at that time, I think we were very concerned about rates at sort of 300 to 400. So we're still in that position, but the curve is clearly on a downward trend. I think a couple of things to point out from the figures that have been published. The testing numbers remain high for Harlow. So Harlow and Tendring, which have the two highest rates in Essex, are continuing to see the highest levels of testing across the county. So that's good. We are also seeing, in common with elsewhere in Essex, it's a uniform pattern across the county actually, that the incidence rate is particularly affecting the over 60 population. In fact, about just over 80% of new cases in Harlow and across Essex are with the over 60s. And that's a substantial shift from where we were in December, where it was primarily younger people. So we have seen that transmission going from younger to older people in the last month or so. That probably reflects some of the figures at the hospital, although we've seen in recent weeks a significant decrease in admissions and COVID patients in the hospital from over 200 at one point. As of yesterday, it was 145. But that's actually a slight increase on the week before. So, I think that's something that we also need to bear in mind when looking at decisions about things that are reopening, that the people that are most affected in the town I think, and the final point, just a little bit of positive news, really. For some time, we've seen a lot of Harlow wards in the worst affected 5% of wards across the whole of the East of England region. At one time, 8 of our 11 wards were in that list, and as of yesterday, there are none. All of our wards have slipped out of that list, which is really good news.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very helpful. I'll open up to questions and discussion at this point. Does anybody have any questions for Andrew or comments they'd like to make on that information? Councillor Johnson and then Councillor Ingle.
Thank you, Chair. It's really great to get the report back on where we are with the numbers. The numbers that I'm particularly interested at the moment, Andrew, are around the numbers getting jabbed in the arm with the vaccine, because I think that is our way out as a country, out of the current lockdown and getting our town, particularly as we're interested in, back in business. Nationally, we're told today over 10 million jabs and over 65s now in the next cohort of jabs, which is great news for us if you're saying that we're particularly suffering with illnesses in our over 60s. But when are we going to start getting some stats from the CCG on the numbers that are going through the leisure zone and the GP surgery in the town? When are we going to start getting some stats as the council overseeing this area for the number of our residents that are starting to be protected, please?
Ryan,
I believe that's coming.
Oh, sorry.
I believe that's coming within the next week. Information I had earlier today is just that the government are going to start releasing that information, hopefully later this week, by upper tier and lower tier authority area. So at the moment we don't have that information, but we're told that's coming in the next few days.
Thank you. Chair, can I ask a second question and then I'll give way? Secondly, we're told that the government says that all care homes that are eligible have been offered their vaccinations now. Can we just confirm that everyone that's a resident of a care home in Harlow has either been offered their vaccination or hasn't for a particular reason, i.e. they've got COVID at the moment?
Possibly that's information coming through, Brian, that you'll be getting. Am I right? Or do you have it, Andrew? It'd be great.
Andrew?
Yeah, I don't have that information offhand. We would have to go to the public health people at the county council to get clarification on that.
Can we do that? Can we?
Yeah,
Brian, can you write to your person there and say that it was raised and it's a concern?
We'll raise that tomorrow and get an answer back.
Great, thank you. I think Councillor Ingle, then Councillor Holcoop, and then Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, we all welcome the steep decline in the number of cases in Harlow and across Essex and the country. But we must caution people. I sat in a meeting of the Essex COVID local outbreak panel with leaders from across the county some months ago, well, only a month or so ago now, when the rate in Basildon was 120 and there was alarm that in the current trajectory of the time that Harlow might reach, and I'll use the words that we used in that meeting, the disastrous levels of 120. So great, fantastic that the numbers have come down to 371. But 371 a month ago was considered well above what was disastrous. So we must temper expectation at this point. But there is a question I'd like to ask. I was contacted by a resident today, and Councillor Johnson spoke about vaccines, and he's absolutely right. Getting this vaccine programme right is the hope that we can have for later on in this year. And we must all support it, and we must all encourage residents to take the vaccine if it's offered to them. A slight concern, a bit of an inconsistency perhaps. I was contacted by a resident only this morning who has a relative who lives in Broxbourne. And of course, Broxbourne is an area where the government feel concerned that the new South African variant may be present. And they're taking it so seriously that they're doing surge testing of residents in Broxbourne. And, you know, the message that stay at home, if at all possible, that's applied to the whole country is even more rigorously expected to be followed in those areas where they think the South African variant may be present. Her relative got her invitation for a vaccine jab in Harlow. And it seems to me that there is an inconsistency in asking people to travel from an area that's being surge tested for the new South African variant to travel to another town where it's hitherto not yet been detected. And I spoke to the chief executive this morning and asked if he would contact the CCG for me and see if they have any plans to put up a satellite vaccination centre in Broxbourne to avoid that travel. Because, of course, the new AstraZeneca jab doesn't need the -60 temperatures. It can be safely carried in a cool box. I wonder if you've got an update on that for me, Mr. King.
Yes, I've spoken to the CCG a couple of times today. Of course, Broxbourne are part of the same health system, so they would be using the leisure zone. There is a meeting tomorrow morning between the Directors of Public Health of both Hertfordshire and Essex to discuss what they call Operation Eagle, which is exactly what we're talking about, the South African variant. And I will come back to you as soon as I get a response after that meeting.
Well, can I just urge that we ask them to seriously consider a satellite? We don't want to I don't want to in any way slow down the vaccination programme or put anybody off. I just wonder if they could set up a satellite in Broxbourne to avoid travelling to Harlow at this current time.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Holcoop.
I was going to ask the question about the vaccine because I've had mine last Wednesday. Yeah, and I know a lot of other people have. It's the Oxford one, and I'm pleased that they said 75% tonight. It's very, very safe, and we're doing very well with it. My thoughts are the police raids that are going on and all the weekends and stuff. Is that affecting, or will that affect the numbers across the wards, depending on the wards that they're going into? With these COVID incidents, will that make an up or a down situation across the town because people are still not taking on board the seriousness of this and the police have to intervene? Thank you, Chair.
Andrew Ramage. Andrew, do you have anything to respond to that? Any thoughts?
Well, it's clearly too early to say whether those specific incidents will lead to an increase in cases, but I think that, you know, the very fact that those issues have had to be dealt with emphasises the comments that members have made here tonight, that, you know, vigilance is key, and you know, can't take our foot off the pedal really, because it would not take much for rates to increase significantly. You know, we were at a very low base in early December and the rates went up almost exponentially. So I think that message, even though the rates are falling down consistently now over 3 weeks, the message that, you know, we're still in a difficult position and people need to continue to follow the guidelines is absolutely key.
Thank you.
Come in.
Well, I've actually got, I think, Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Charles, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. You asked a question at the beginning of this relating to playgrounds, and I would say it would be absolutely irresponsible at this present time to even be considering opening up such sites at this present time, or let's be honest, for the next few weeks. And I would be saying when the schools go back, that's the time we would need to carry out the review, because it's not about the children, it's the parents that are standing far too close to each other and that they are inadvertently putting themselves at risk. I completely concur with what Andrew Bramage is saying. We have 145 very ill people of our community fighting for their lives at this present time. The NHS is doing a great job, but it will not take much more before we are tipped over the edge and we are in a disaster situation. We as public servants have to do everything we possibly can to avoid and mitigate people getting the virus in the first place. And I know that what Andrew Johnson was saying, the panacea is the vaccine, but it's not. At the end of the day, we are going to have this virus for a long period of time, and that therefore it's absolutely essential that, yes, people need to be vaccinated, but the vaccination takes 4 weeks to settle. They need a second vaccination. So it's imperative that we do not take the foot off the proverbial pedal at this particular area, and we reinforce the message that journeys, travel, etc. has only to be essential. If you have to go anywhere, wear face masks, keep your hands clean, and for goodness sake, keep your social distancing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Durkin. Councillor Charles.
Thanks, Chair. Just moving back to more strategic thinking, which I thought was the focus of this COVID working group. One of the bigger picture challenges, I think, going forward is thinking about the potential for surge capacity to deal with what has been reported around variants and so on. Because we're not out of the woods yet in terms of the potential for peaks in virus being picked up in the different communities in our town. And what discussions, Brian, have there been with the wider Essex group of chief executives and the county council around a strategy for looking into the medium and the long term about how we can work with our public health colleagues to have that surge capacity? I think a bid from Essex around that into government is really important going forward, because we could have these pockets and isolated infections picking up in our communities across Essex, not just in Harlow. We need to constantly think about the bigger picture here, not just what's happening at this moment in time.
Sorry, can I just clarify, sorry, Brian, just for my own, you were talking about surge capacity in terms of testing, Councillor Charles? So that
No, I wasn't. I was talking in terms of resources to manage a sudden increase in infections in an isolated particular community, whether it be in Harlow or other parts of Essex, so that there's immediate movement of resource, and that is pre-planned.
Just specific, what sort of, just so I understand, what sort of resource do you mean?
To manage the infection, Councillor Harvey, in terms of public health resource, councils coming in with their own with resources to isolate the particular spread of the infection in a certain area.
So you mean to sort of cordon off areas and to contain it?
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just to manage and isolate where. I'm not talking about cordoning off communities or anything like that.
Sorry, I honestly, I really don't understand. I'm just trying to get my head around. I'm sorry.
So if there is a sudden peak in infection rates in a certain area, that there is the resource available to suddenly move and mobilise to deal with that and deal with those pockets of infections that may come up where there are variants that we're now seeing, that there needs to be a long-term plan to meet that, so that if there is a step down by public health officials, a step down by councils, and we're moving into normal life, and then suddenly there's an infection spread, they can mobilise rapidly to deal with it, and there's the resources there. And to do that, you need central government funding to do that. And the way of moving this forward so that we don't get into that situation is to have that conversation with Essex County Council colleagues, our colleagues across Essex councils, to make that case. That's what I'm saying.
Shall I come in, Chair?
Sure, please.
Yes, I mean, one of the benefits, if it be a benefit, of the whole pandemic has been how councils and other public bodies, and particularly health, have worked together. I've met people I've never met before who are doing a great job in the health sector across all the 3 trusts covering Essex, and we meet regularly as an SCG twice a week currently. At one time it was daily. And we work together and we do plan for what's happening tomorrow, next day, the next week, the next month. We have TCGs, tactical coordinating groups, which do that. I do take Councillor Charles' point, though, that maybe we should be looking at government funding, additional government funding. We got a letter today from the Secretary of State saying how well councils have done, and actually offering more funding for vaccination work. So there's clearly an appetite there for the government to actually help us. I would also say that we now, I think it's 2,500 volunteers have signed up with Essex to serve the whole county. So we've got that as well. But I will take away the point that Councillor Charles makes about should we actually have a better plan moving forward. I would say finally, though, that if I call it the Broxbourne situation, has really focused people's minds today. And there has been a lot of letters gone out in Broxbourne and bits of Essex, to be fair, which have the same postcode, with a view to explaining the situation to them and explaining what is happening. And that has been mobilised overnight, effectively. And I think by focusing the mind on what's happened overnight, we should now be thinking about, yes, this might happen again. What are we going to do? Are we going to have the people in the facility there? I think that's a valid point that Councillor Charles has made.
And Brian, just so I understand, was the mobilisation that happened in Broxbourne, was that locally led or was it from the central government?
It was led by the Director of Public Health of Hertfordshire, Jim McManus, and he is coordinating now with Mike Docherty, the Director of Public Health of Essex, and I've referred to a meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. They're both going to be at it, as well as Directors of Public Health of Thurrock and Southend. So there is that coordination. We, of course, being in West Essex, are almost in Hertfordshire as well as we are in Essex. So, you know, it's important that we know what's going on in Hertfordshire and we do coordinate that as well. So there's good coordination there. But I think what's happening in Broxbourne has focused people's minds, as I mentioned earlier. It's not just Broxbourne, but it's the local one.
Councillor Charles, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question?
No, all I would say to Brian is that that's exactly the point I was making. So I'm grateful for you coming back there, Brian. All I'm trying to suggest here is that there is appetite to reinforce the local approaches to dealing with these pockets of infections when they come about. So take advantage of that goodwill and do this coordinated action so that we're in the position, if these things come up, that we've already done the legwork in the background to accommodate. Because in, say, 4 or 5 months' time, if we start to de-escalate the management we have in place at the moment from a public health and local council perspective, there is always the danger that we have to escalate up again to where we have been recently. That's all I was saying.
I don't think there's any risk of de-escalation at this stage. Councillor Johnson, did you want to come in? Your hands up.
Thank you, Chair. I think on that, and linked to the conversation that you and I had yesterday, it would be really good for this group to see that plan for all of our services. And I know we talked about this yesterday, and you've already committed to me a piece of work with me. But I think we as a working group to help advise need to see the, what needs to happen X, Y, and Z to get us to this stage. And it may be X, Y, and Z to escalate or de-escalate any of our council services and any of the things that we are supporting in the town, be it vaccine hubs, be it testing hubs, not just the standard council services. But it would also be useful to see those for each of our services around Pets Corner and the Playhouse. And I know a lot of this is to do with when the government say, yes, we can jump. But we need to make sure as a council that we have the processes in place and the timeline in place to be able to then deliver. So I hope you'll say a few words on that to us, Chair. Sorry, Councillor
Johnson, I thought we were going to cover that in the final. I thought we agreed last night that we would do that in the final point. I'm very happy to talk about it now. Okay, I'm happy for you to take it then. I thought we said you would take it now. Okay, I beg your pardon, sorry. The other question that I have is around a disturbing article that I read on Sky the other day. I think they were quoting a Guardian survey where they were saying that 72% of people who identify as black were refusing to take the vaccine currently.
because they weren't understanding or acknowledging its efficiency or even the virus itself. Now, I know Jane Greer has done a lot of work with our community groups, reaching into different community groups to try and access them, and also so that we can push the message that this vaccine is a great thing, and we really need all our residents to take it, as Councillor Durkin was saying earlier, to take the pressure off our health service. Can we have an update at some stage, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tonight, on what we are doing to support the CCG? Because I haven't seen many comms from them. I see a lot of comms from our comms team around the vaccine and around COVID, but I don't see a great deal from the CCG around getting that vaccine message out. So I wonder if we could have a report back on that at some stage as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On comms, I don't know, Jane, do you want to come in on that, and also, or indeed on the other point that Councillor Johnson raised?
Sorry, not comms, but the other point. So I was actually at a CCG meeting last Thursday where I raised this point, exactly this point, and they have, I'm told they've just recruited, well, actually she's at the meeting, they've just recruited somebody to take this forward. So I spoke at that meeting about our community forum meeting, and have invited the lady to attend at least the first meeting to start to get that message out. So I need to confirm that with her. I've suggested a date to her, but that's how I'll be taking that forward.
That's great. Thanks, Jane. Brian, are you able to talk about the CCG and comms, or is anybody, maybe Simon Hill would normally speak about that?
I mean, Andrew Johnson and I have discussed this several times about the value of comms. We will have a meeting shortly with the CCG, with myself and a few of you, where we will raise this yet again. But I do find that our comms are excellent on vaccinations, and I do believe CCG could do a little bit more, but I don't want to say more at this stage.
We have had, I think at least one, possibly two meetings, and their comms teams have been there. So clearly we need to address that. Okay, thank you. Anything else at this point in response to Andrew Bramage's report? Yes, Councillor Edwards, I beg your pardon, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. Just briefly, I think we also, although the rate overall has come down to 370 or thereabouts, 100,000, there's still quite a significant variation across the town. So some areas it's 500, the rate is 502. In another area, 430. Another area, it's 483. So whilst on the one of the lower areas, it's down to 199.6 or 199. So there is quite a sort of a variation in the town, and I would want that to be taken into account as and when eventually we have the discussion about the reopening of the playgrounds, etc. Because it may well be that it's how can I put it? And some of these figures historically changed very, very quickly on the way up, So just notice.
And I think, Andrew Bramage, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's because of that highly changeable nature of those numbers that we are more inclined on looking at Harlow as a whole, or certainly in larger areas than ward by ward. Andrew, do you want to say anything? Which is not to say, that we should totally disregard it, but I think in terms of overall trends, Andrew, is that correct?
Absolutely. I think in particular as we're seeing the case numbers coming down to the levels where they are now, the absolute numbers per ward are relatively low. So it does not take very much for percentages to change and for incidence rates to change. I would personally have some caution about paying too much attention to fluctuations at a ward level, particularly now when we're down to sort of 300 odd cases a week across the whole town. I think it could be dangerous to take a decision about opening something in one area and not another, because on the basis of a figure that may well change by the following week.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add or contribute under item 5?
Chair, if I may, just for clarification on the playgrounds, I'm sorry to come back to it, but I don't think we've actually had a view. I mean, I suggested earlier, and it's not my place at this meeting really, but that we do review it in mid-February, and that may well be extending it later to when the primary schools open or whatever. But I think a review in mid-February feels right to me.
I would agree with that, and I think looking, there's some nodding heads, and Councillor Ingle, I'll come to you in a minute. I think that this is a very sensible approach. I also just want to remind colleagues that, when we took the decision, and there was understandably a certain amount of pushback from some residents who, for reasons we can understand, did feel disappointed about this. And we did undertake to keep a very close eye on the situation. And that is what this conversation is about, is ensuring that this isn't something that is reviewed, in the future. It's something that we return to at every opportunity. But I think that sounds to me like the right time frame. Councillor Ingle, what are your views?
Thank you, Chair. I can totally concur with what Councillor Durkin said. We've got to try and support consistent messaging. At the moment, the message is stay at home if at all possible. The message is don't send your children to primary school unless you have no alternative. Now, I would be concerned about reviewing in 2 weeks' time, in that I don't want to give residents false hope to think that in 2 weeks' time we're likely to open. So I'm happy for the Chief Executive to review the situation in 2 weeks' time, but also to make it clear that whilst the message remains stay at home if at all possible, and while the message remains parents shouldn't be gathering at the school gates and children shouldn't be mixing in primary schools, that those are the key determining factors. And so it is unlikely that even if we review it in 2 weeks, it is most unlikely that we will be opening them before schools open. But the review will have a value, I think, in terms of plotting the path towards it by saying, okay, schools must reopen. The message, you must stay at home, if at all possible, needs to be relaxed by the government. And when that's done, then we can open playgrounds, but we need to have some work done so that we can open very, very quickly, so that we've got the resources lined up, ready to go and do the cleaning and do the repairs and make sure that they're safe, so that when those changes are made, we can open, preferably within 24 hours.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm very happy with that suggested approach from Brian, that he reviews it on the 12th. And I think Mark's just reiterated everything I said at the start around having that route map or tick boxes around what we need to have achieved before we open the playgrounds. I'm not necessarily looking for a date, but I think for advice to you as the portfolio holder, we need a set of, what needs to happen first before the playgrounds open. And that may be the government decide X or the government decide Y, or it could be, the number of infections drops to X or Y. But I think we just need to have that published so that we all have certainty, whichever route the council decides to go down. Let's review it. Let's produce the document and allow the public to have total transparency of the decision-making process.
Yeah,
terrific. Does anyone disagree with that? Otherwise, let's proceed on that basis, shall we?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Now we come to item 6, which is a review of the very successful business forum breakfast last Friday. I guess, Andrew Bramage, this is your item and mine, possibly mine, to start with, and then if you want to fill in any gaps, and Councillor Durkin, you were there too, so perhaps if you have anything to contribute. But this was our second meeting of a jointly chaired event. Michael Harravan and I, Harlow Council and the Chamber, and we were really thrilled to have 50, I think, businesses represented on the call, which was a sizable increase on the first call, where I think we'd had probably maybe 30. So even that had been very positive. And there's clearly considerable momentum behind the forum. And we had guest speakers. Andrew, you might help me with who they were, because I couldn't remember the titles of the organisation, but basically they both represented excellent support services that are available to local businesses, to support them with business planning, to support them with Brexit planning, to support them with issues related to grants and COVID, the COVID situation. And those two themes were very much central to the discussion: recovery from COVID and adapting to Brexit. I think the key message out of the discussion about COVID and the recovery was that business is looking for what the word they used, and it was a word Andrew and I used last night, which is a roadmap. They are looking to the government primarily, but also locally for what are the signs and what are the signals and what are going to be the triggers for different scenarios and different actions that are going to enable them to plan for restarting their business and getting back. But clearly they want guidance on the conditions that are going to need to be met in order for them to start to engineer back up again. So that was a very clear message, and we undertook to communicate on behalf of the business community to our MP, which we are in the process of doing. And then on Brexit, actually, there was quite a lot of discussion around that, and actually there was some positive experiences, I think, and some gnarly points. But I think, Andrew, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a really useful forum on that front. I'm not a business person affected by Brexit, but my sense of the discussion was there was some questions that were dealt with very convincingly, and it was a really useful forum. It's always an indicator when people stay on to the end, and I think we had full attendance at the point we said goodbye. So it's a monthly forum. I would be delighted if others would like to join. I don't know, Councillor Durkin, if you want to share any views that you had of the forum and the quality of the discussion or the speakers or the general kind of atmosphere. But yeah, very happy to hear from either of you if you want to share anything about it.
Well, if I can start, Chair, I think what was very good this time was the diversity of the businesses and actually how supportive they were of each other. A number of the businesses were single-handed and that therefore they had limited opportunities, certainly around IT, but actually the way that people were coming forward and offering support and help was so refreshing that actually they're all different businesses, but they're in there to make the difference to our town and community. And then we also had medium-sized businesses, and again, they were very interested in the impact and effect that Brexit would have. And I thought the speaker was very, very good on that particular topic. And certainly the feedback I got was that actually this is a positive, helpful way. It's not just about money, it's actually about helping each other at a very, very sensitive and vulnerable time. Thank you, Chair.
You've just reminded me, what did Jackie say? She said, Jackie from, oh, Andrew, I'm so sorry, but she said she ended her presentation and she said, you'd be mad, she said something even stronger than you'd be utterly mad not to get in touch with us. You'd have a screw loose, which was
oh, absolutely, because it just wasn't grants. There were talks about low interest loans, new activities, new resources available. So it's not just about government grants, it's other ways that they can help promote and support their businesses during these particular times. So yeah, I thought it was well chaired, well managed, and actually well received.
Thank you to Councillor Durkin. Andrew Bramage, do you have anything to add to that?
And Jane may want to chip in as well.
Oh, thank you, Jane. I'm sorry, Jane. Forgive me. Sorry.
Her team Jane's team that did all the work for organising this. I think you've largely said it all, Chair. That I think for me one of the really strong things that came out of it was the networking opportunity. The businesses were really grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk with each other and to raise these sorts of issues. So I think now moving this to a monthly forum will be a very positive step. And we did actually record this last event. So perhaps maybe with the minutes of this meeting, we could circulate the link of that. So if anybody wanted to go back in and see the presentations from the speakers on both COVID sort of recovery issues, business growth issues, but also Brexit issues, then they're all there on, or we can circulate the link for that.
Jane, sorry, that's so rude of me. Sorry.
It's fine. Just to say, you said about the speakers. So the speakers were Best Growth Hub, NWES, and UTAS, sorry. And I suppose the only other comment from me is the challenge is to keep the agenda exciting and to keep people on the hook. So we have officers and the two chairs have a meeting on Thursday to start to think about the next meeting, which is I think on the 26th of February. So we need to make sure it's exciting and of interest to businesses.
Yes, it is 26th of February, and perhaps it's just worth mentioning that we did talk about an exciting kind of exemplar project. We talked about the need for the council to show leadership as we adapt to these circumstances and look to deliver its events. We talked about in particular harnessing the newly found digital access that we have to a lot of homes. So why not look to have our award ceremonies this year delivered using virtual technology, perhaps hybrid events where they're partly delivered live from the Playhouse to small audiences, assuming that's possible, but also made available, like meetings like this are. So we talked about working with local businesses to look at how we might start to deliver that kind of activity to inspire other local businesses to think about adaptations that they may make, and also to ensure that we retain the connection with our residents. Would anyone like to talk about that? We'd really love it if you listen to the audio was excellent, the speakers were excellent. You're right, Andrew. Any comments or questions about that? No? Okay, great. Well, in that case, I think we'll move on to, I think the final item on the agenda, and that is matters of urgent business. I have something that I'd like to talk about, which is what Andrew alluded to last night. But maybe before I come on to that, does anybody else have anything that they would like to raise? No? Okay, well, what I wanted to talk about now, we at the last working group meeting talked about the need to consider the function of this group and to look at how it was configured and how we're meeting and how we're working, just to ensure that 10 months on, we are really fit for purpose and that we are as effective as we can and need to be. And so last night, Councillor Johnson, Brian Keane and I had a conversation to talk about the possibility of slightly reworking the way we meet so that there is potentially smaller groups working around particular issues or topics and doing more work to bring to this group that is considered and nutted out in a different forum. And we think that that's probably a sensible way to go forward. For example, to give you an indication of the sort of work that a smaller group can come together around would be, as Andrew alluded to a little while ago, working up a roadmap out, the roadmap to back to normal life, such as it's going to be in the future, looking at what the conditions need to be, not just for the playgrounds, but for all our services to be brought back into service, to look at the internal activity of the council, to understand what the route back is that. And clearly we can't put dates to these things, but we can, as Andrew said, identify the conditions which we, at this stage, using the best information that we have, would need to see in order to make these different things happen. And then at least we would be giving some certainty to residents and businesses, and also I think some hope that we are seeing the way out and planning accordingly for it. Councillor Johnson, do you want to say anything further about that? Oh, got your hand up, sorry.
Yes, Chair, thank you for it. And thanks for having the conversation with me yesterday. And I'm sorry if I jumped the gun.
No, it's fine.
I think it's really important. I think things, we did say last meeting that we would take stock of where we are. And I think it's important to do that. I do feel that the meeting, even though you run the meeting well, it is large, it is cumbersome. There's a lot of politicians vying to talk, a lot of officers trying to get information across. And I do think working in subgroups may enable us to work slightly more strategically, which has always been the thing that my group has ranted on about on these meetings. And I do think it allows us to specialise and look at different issues. So yeah, really happy to work with you on that. I think a small group to progress that and to get this into a slightly better shape going forward. Very supportive of. Really happy to continue working cross-party with you on this, because I think the recovery for our town is the most important thing, and it transcends the politics. And I'd like to try and keep politics out of this forum as long as possible. So yeah, really happy to support you and really happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Does anybody else have any comments that they'd like to make on that, or is everyone happy that we proceed on that basis? And Councillor Ingle, sorry.
Just to say, I'm supportive of the suggestion, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for all those nodding heads. That's great. I shall take that as agreement in that case. All right. Well, I don't think there are any other items of business. So thank you again for your time. Stay safe and look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you to everybody who's